text is the gospel lesson you heard just a moment ago, where aged Simeon and Anna were privileged to see and hold the Christ child. There was a children's Christmas program at one time. At the end of it, all the songs had been sung. The shepherds had come and they'd peeked in and saw the baby, and the wise men had brought their gifts, and angels had given their message. And then all the cast of those children of that first Christmas began to leave. The wise men, the shepherds, the angels. Only Joseph and Mary and the crib remained. And Joseph turned to go, and Mary, glancing back at the crib, turned to follow. And suddenly she turned back, and she ran back and snatched that baby doll by the foot, stuck it under her arm, and left. It was that final little episode that was perhaps the most striking of the whole evening. Mary had almost forgotten Jesus. And then suddenly she remembered him and clutched him under her arm. Here we are in this first Sunday after Christmas, and it gives us another opportunity to clutch that Christ child as well, to grab hold of the simple truth of Christmas. What is that simple truth? We learn first off in this text that God keeps His promises. And that's so precious to us who have read, who have heard, who know God's promises and can be certain He's not going to waver. He keeps them. He does what He says. Mary, Joseph, and the baby Jesus stayed in Bethlehem about a week. Mary and Joseph were devout Jews who took their religious obligations seriously. You heard in that first reading from Exodus how it was required that the firstborn male should be brought to be dedicated in the temple. So when Jesus was 8 days old, they took him to Jerusalem. They took him to the temple, according to the custom of presenting that child to God in that place. According to their law, an offering was required. It could be either 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons. Jesus would now be dedicated according to the law of Moses. As Mary and Joseph, no doubt proudly, were walking up towards the temple, they encountered an old man named Simeon. Simeon went to that temple virtually every day of his life. He was a very special person who enjoyed being in the presence of the Lord. He knew that's the place where he was to be. It says the Holy Spirit moved him to be there. So here he was at the exact time when Mary, Joseph, and Jesus were entering. And as we heard in the text, God had promised Simeon that before he died, he would see the Messiah. He had been looking every day. Without fail, every day he would look and see, will I see the Messiah today? On this particular day, he sees this young couple with a baby coming up the steps, and he wondered if this might be the one that he was waiting for. Simeon approached Mary, and he asked if he might hold the child. And with wrinkled hands, Simeon stood there holding this newborn. It was while he was holding the baby Jesus that the Spirit revealed to him that this was the child that he had spent his life waiting for. Simeon began to sing, Lord, now you may let your servant depart in peace, because my eyes have seen the Lord. My eyes have seen your salvation. And from that moment on, his life would never be the same, because he had seen the Messiah. God keeps His promises. Somebody once asked an aide of Confederate General Robert E. Lee about a certain thing the general had promised. What guarantee do I have that the general will keep what he has promised? Lee's aide promptly replied, you have General Lee's promise. You could have no better guarantee. That's how it is when God makes a promise. That promise will be kept. Do you remember an ad not very long ago? It was in magazines. I think it was even on TV, as I recall. It was an ad for an insurance company that it was all about promises. It went something like this. Showed a picture of a man and his daughter. And the ad read like this, A promise to attend recitals, late meetings notwithstanding. A promise not to show up with your friends when she's at the mall. A promise to keep everything safe, no matter what. And as the ad went on, it said, nothing binds us to the other like a promise kept. Well said, and very true. Christmas is about a God who keeps His promises. But we also need to say this. God does not promise that we will be given a life that you can just skip and hop merrily through life as if things will all be smooth and easy. Anything but. As Simeon held the baby, Jesus in his arms, the Holy Spirit revealed to him this was the long-awaited Messiah. A very special moment for that old man. He'd waited all his life for that moment. And now in his unsteady arms, he holds the Messiah. Simeon then blessed Mary and Joseph. This would have been one of those warm Christmas memories that Joseph and Mary would have cherished forever if Simeon would have stopped right there. But he didn't. He turned to Mary with a heartbreaking prophecy. He said to her, "A sword will pierce your own soul." What could he mean by that? A sword would pierce Mary's soul. Here they were so warmed and encouraged by this man who acknowledged and held and adored this child, and he turns and says something like that to her? What could it mean? There was once a Christmas play held in a maximum security prison, of all places. What an unlikely place. This prison held the worst possible offenders, murderers, armed robbers, rapists. At the chaplain's suggestion, the prisoners themselves would act out the story for the other prisoners. Since they were in a maximum security prison, nothing was allowed to be brought in for the play. All the costumes, all the props had to come from within the walls of the prison. A mop was found to be used for Mary's hair. A ski mask with some cotton balls on it glued onto some socks was used for the sheep. In fact, the socks even had to come from 4 different prisoners, because in this prison, socks were only issued twice a year, and nobody wanted to give up a whole pair of socks, so 4 prisoners each offered one, and those rather holy socks became holy in another way.